Hi, thank you for joining us for Achates Live today on Thursday, the 11th of May. Today, we're going to be talking about membership schemes and what the future looks like for our sector as we compare the traditional and often transactional benefits-based giving relationship with more philanthropic and impact-driven models. As part of today's discussion, we'll share examples of how fundraisers have developed or repositioned their membership programs, the successes and challenges they faced, and what they've learned along the way. Our conversation today will be chaired by our Achates senior consultant, Phoebe Walker, who will be joined by myself and Rosie Hebb, who is head of individual giving at Rambert. My name's Cordelia Millwood, and I'm a development manager here at Achates. Achates is a creative consultancy with a holistic approach to fundraising, recruitment, and strategy. We take our name from the Greek and Roman mythology. Achates was a close friend and loyal advisor to Aeneas, which is absolutely the role we hope to play supporting the cultural sector. Achates Live was set up to bring together fundraisers and arts professionals to discuss key topics and create a space for us to support each other. And while we acknowledge that Achates does not necessarily have all the answers, what we do hope is to present an overview of the sector, and we are very passionate about using this role and perspective in the most supportive way. It is worth noting, of course, that all the information that we share today is live and correct at the point of broadcast. And I'm now very happy to pass over to Phoebe, who will be sharing today's session.
Thanks, Cordelia. Hi, everyone. So I'm just going to give a little bit of context to introduce today's session on membership. So individual giving, it's often the area which arts organisations feel uncomfortable with as they struggle to express the charitable value of their work. And given this, Achates strongly advocates that an organisation considers its donors as a community who share its aims and ambitions and are investing in bringing those shared ideas about. Some arts organisations are unwilling to genuinely take this approach because they fear a loss of autonomy will accompany the creation of real stakeholder-based relationships. And we'd recommend honest reflection on this point and on the fact that the result of not doing this is that power is commonly ceded to donors without a clear understanding of what the company would like the community around it to look like and the types of contribution it would like to see beyond financial ones. Individual giving schemes have historically been informed by the belief that audiences don't understand the arts as charities, which play an important role in society and whose work has real impact. And as a result, these schemes have largely been transactional, with benefits linked to access, such as priority booking. And this is understandable, given the fact that historically the sector has been reluctant to embrace fundraising and viewed it as a short-term necessary evil until full state funding was restored. As a result, whilst this has been a successful approach for major organisations with sellout shows for whom priority booking is an asset, so for example, the National Theatre, the Tate Galleries, it's a model that rarely transfers outside of this limited group of major organisations in quite the same way. What has become apparent across the sector is that small to medium scale organisations have pioneered individual philanthropy at lower levels of giving because they've not been able to rely on those access-based benefits. Ironically, the focus that COVID-19 has necessitated on communicating with audiences rather than treating them simply as consumers, along with the fact that COVID actually enhanced the understanding that organisations need support, has highlighted that individuals of all scales of potential giving are willing to support arts organisations philanthropically, and that charitable support of the arts is not just the preserve of major donors. So with that context in mind, I'm delighted to be joined today by two colleagues working in the sector who've kindly agreed to share their thoughts and experiences in this area. I'm looking forward to thinking together with them about how the sector can truly shift the dial from transactional to transformational giving. So I'm really pleased to introduce Rosie Hebb, Head of Individual Giving at Rambert. Hi, Rosie.
Hi, Phoebe. How are you?
Good, you're really welcome to Achates Live. Rambert is a contemporary dance company based in London, known for its brilliant and daring approach. And Rosie looks after their major donor and patron programmes, annual appeals and campaigns and legacy giving. She's an experienced individual giving fundraiser and has previously held roles at the V&A, looking after their patrons programme, at Opera Holland Park, running their membership schemes, and at the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra, working across marketing and development. Next, you've already met her, but I'm really pleased to introduce again my colleague Cordelia Millwood, who's Development Manager here at Achates. Cordelia works to support multidisciplinary arts organisations to secure essential funding to deliver highly ambitious and diverse creative programmes. Her previous roles include as Relationships Manager at Arts Council England, principally supporting the 2023 to 26 National Portfolio Organisation Assessment Period. She's also been Patrons Executive at Serpentine Galleries and Development Manager at Women of the World Foundation, where she led on strategic bid writing, curated major sponsorships, including Bloomberg and MasterCard, and established a fundraising strategy to take the two-day festival into a global charity which promotes gender equality. So a really warm welcome to you both. And I wonder if I could just ask both of you to start us off with a bit of your own context and your own insights into the topic we're discussing today, membership schemes, how they're positioned, how you've thought about this balance between transactional and transformational in the various roles that you've had, and your experiences of how to develop or build them, or even not to have them at all. It would be great to get your insights on that. And Rosie, I wonder if we could start with you.
Yeah, sure. So my experience of membership schemes, I've worked across different organisations, all within the arts sector. And I found that in each organisation, because the charities are so different and the scale of the organisations have been different, my experience of membership has kind of been quite varied, and they've worked in different ways across different organisations. And I think when it comes down to membership schemes and how you might want to run them at your organisation, it's really kind of dependent on what works right for you. And I think historically, particularly within arts organisations, charities have always had membership schemes. It's sort of like the bread and butter of a lot of organisations, and particularly for individual giving fundraising, it's a fairly sort of reliable source of income. It can generate a lot of money. It's a great way to sort of interact with your donors and provide those sort of engagement opportunities to develop relationship with donors. But it really kind of depends on what works right for you, and there's not a sort of one size fits all when it comes to membership schemes. And actually now, with my experience working at Rhombert, we've actually gone through a bit of a change where we've actually dropped some of our membership schemes, and we're now looking to focus more on sort of impact philanthropy and working more in sort of raising larger gifts and running schemes where it's more about the donor getting more involved with what they're donating towards, rather than saying, okay, in return for your gift, we're going to give you all of these benefits. So I'm now kind of on a slightly different journey where I'm kind of, I suppose, letting go a bit of my experience of membership schemes and more kind of focusing on that. But again, it really depends on what your organisation is doing and what you feel sort of works for you and your donors.
That's great. Thanks, Rosie. That's really interesting, especially the decisions at Rhombert to drop some schemes, and it would be great to get into that a little bit later on. Cordelia, could we come to you on your experience in membership schemes and challenges you faced, experiences you've had?
Yeah, totally. So my first ever job in the arts was in the individual giving department at the Serpentine Galleries, which I guess is quite interesting because it's they obviously have an already really well-established membership scheme. It's of a fairly sort of traditional, I guess, somewhat hierarchical setup, meaning that the larger gift, the larger the gift, the greater sort of entitlement to a broader range of benefits. And there were, I think, over 300 donors, part of the tiered system, giving over £500 a year. So it was huge and obviously an incredibly significant source of annual income. But I think, just as what Rosie was saying, what's so interesting was this was, really well aligned with what the Serpentine had the capacity and the sort of aligned with their ethos. they were able to facilitate these donors at kind of a high level, special private views of exhibitions, artist studios, private tours of collectors' homes, and really kind of knowing that because of their connection and the access that enabled, that was sort of what the members were joining for and interested in, and that was they were able to facilitate that. And I think what was really interesting was when I moved to the WOW Foundation, where very much in the early stages of setting up as a charity, the WOW Foundation runs Women of the World festivals. And previously, it was sort of part of the South Bank Centre where the festival in London is held every year. And when I joined, we were transitioning into a brand new organisation. We didn't yet have charitable status. They now do. But and I think what was interesting was me kind of coming from that really traditional membership scheme, which is very much benefits focused, trying to set up an individual giving scheme. And, when we first started thinking about how we might run this, we did try the traditional kind of gold, silver, bronze patron scheme, and with associated tiered benefits. And it's a really interesting lesson in kind of trial and error, because we have found it incredibly hard to get any traction. And I think, what really we had to go back and think about is why might a donor give to this organisation, and how can we create, if we are going to have a membership, how can we make that really aligned with not just our ethos, but what we aligned with the rationale for why a donor might give. And so I think for somewhere like the Serpentine, or kind of organizations that have huge brand association and access, is very, very different for smaller organizations that might still be in the stage of kind of communicating actually what they do. So really focusing on the change that the organization is making rather than what they can offer in return. So when we sort of scrapped that patron scheme, which ultimately wasn't really in line with kind of our organization's values anyway, we set up what we called the change maker scheme, which was kind of getting rid of all tiered giving, and it was run alongside a kind of marketing campaign that was absolutely sort of promoting the values of the organization, the change the organization was making, and sort of calling on people to align themselves with those values, as sort of an advocate. And in this case, it was with gender equality and sort of celebrating women. And so in that sense, no matter what the size of the donation, everyone was recognised the same, which felt much more aligned with WOW and the organisation. So I think kind of very similar to what Rosie was saying, it really has to be, whether you're, if you're starting a membership from scratch, you really hope it's aligned with the organisation, and, there's no one size fit all. And I think you will really struggle sort of using, whether it's the traditional gold, silver, bronze, or whatever it might be. It really needs to kind of reflect the values and the ethos of the organisation. At Achates, we're always encouraging our clients to think about who their audiences are in terms of their programming, but I think it's also really important when you're thinking about fundraising, who are these donors you're imagining you're reaching, and what is it that would attract them to give. And I think so often we forget to kind of really promote the sort of impact of the work. And it'd be really interesting, Rosie, to kind of hear how you've adopted that impact philanthropy model as well, because I think it's particularly for smaller organizations, when actually there's not, the benefits, you think, well, actually there's not a huge amount, we don't have the resources or the ability to kind of offer that much. What can we give in return, and what are they interested in? What they're interested in is seeing the impact of the work.
Yeah, thanks, Cordelia. That's really, really interesting, and kind of setting up the journey from more traditional structured benefit schemes to a really what sounds or maybe would have been quite a radical style of membership structure or kind of anti-structure at WOW. That's really interesting to hear about your experiences. Rosie, just on that kind of that point from Cordelia about having, setting something up, realizing it wasn't working because it's along maybe traditional lines, it's not quite at odds with the ethos of an organization. Have you kind of had that experience in some of the other organizations you've worked in as well, where maybe things weren't working the way they were, so you were having to kind of review and relook at it? Did that kind of come into your thinking?
In previous organizations, not so much, because I was working for organizations where the benefits that you were offering were kind of the main drive for why someone might join a membership scheme. So before Rombo, I was working at the V&A running their patrons program, and you have this huge, amazing museum where there's so many cool events that donors can come to. And yes, you're organizing those visits to private collections. And there's a real sense of the benefits that you're offering are kind of the key reason as to why someone might donate, kind of like within a patrons program. But then in comparison, when I came to Rombell, we're a much smaller organization, and we're currently a team of 3 in our development team. So we're really, really tiny. And what kind of shifted our thinking around membership schemes was, well, kind of the main reason was resources. And because it's just me running all aspects of individual giving, it made more sense for me to focus my time on bringing bigger gifts in. Because the thing is with I suppose lower level membership schemes, to really make a lot of money out of them, you've got to have hundreds or thousands of people giving at a lower level. And the time and kind of the resources in growing it, as just myself running it, I found that really, really hard. And actually we began to see that we would, over the years, we've been raising more money through sort of like annual appeals or targeted campaigns, and kind of widening the net of people who might be giving to that. And so actually, even just like looking at the figures, it makes more sense for us to focus more on that and sort of drop the lower level membership schemes, but also knowing that a lot of those donors who have been part of that membership scheme for a really long time, I think would still continue to give anyway, possibly at that level, or they might think, okay, well, now I'm going to give a bit less. But I think you're changing that kind of narrative as to why someone might want to give, and more focusing on they're giving because they want to make an impact or they want to help, rather than, well, here's my £50, what am I going to get in return? And I've kind of found that shift really interesting. And I think that's quite a key thing to sort of focus on. So that was our kind of reasoning as to why we're sort of moving away from that membership level. We're still continuing one of our patron levels, which is £1,200 a year. So we're now kind of focusing on that and above, and then doing more of a kind of a general donations drive throughout the year, whether it be towards an appeal or a campaign, where, you know, if people want to donate and they can give at any level, then that's amazing and that's great. So yeah, and again, it kind of boils down to that thing of what's right for you and the size of your organization and your resources. Because at Rombear, the kind of main benefit of being, say, a friend is that you might come into a rehearsal occasionally, or you might get early access to booking dance classes. So really, kind of in the grand scheme of things, they're not really getting that much. So yeah, it kind of made more sense for us now to kind of focus on raising those large gifts, which ultimately will bring in more money. And that's where I can now sort of spend my time.
Thanks, Rosie. And I suppose I'm interested as well in when you were thinking about the reasons and thinking about kind of the revision of membership and getting rid of those lower level membership levels. How much did you already know about the reasons why people were supporting you or wanted to support you? I mean, did you have to do kind of further thinking about that? Did you have to kind of consult with your audience to get that kind of information or insight that helped you to make those decisions? I'm interested in how you kind of, how you communicate with your audiences and got a sense from them of why, the rationale for what you were doing.
I mean, also, I kind of haven't mentioned that our kind of membership scheme was tiny. I mean, we're talking like under 100 people who gave between, I don't know, £75 a year and 1,200. And actually, I'd say it's probably only half of those people that were kind of actively engaged with Rombear, i.e. actually coming along to events, coming to see our shows. And I'd say the other half are kind of people who were happy to donate, but really they didn't really come along to anything. And actually, when you kind of ask donors why they want to give, generally I found that it's because they're believing in your mission and they want to kind of support your cause, and having the benefit of coming in to see or like meet the dancers, that's like a lovely thing to have. But I think I found that it wasn't the kind of primary reason why people were wanting to give. And because it was such a small number of donors that were giving at that lower level, there's still opportunities for them to give. And I just felt that there wasn't that need to then be like, okay, well, here are your benefits that you can have in return. So again, it's that kind of shift of, we want people to give to us because they love what we're doing and they like genuinely want to make a difference with what we're doing, rather than that notion that you have to pay a certain level to get something in return. It doesn't have a kind of very like an equal vibe to it. Like, people should be able to give whatever they want to our charity, and they can still feel involved in what we're doing, but it just doesn't necessarily have to be through a list of benefits that you give in return.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that speaks to what Cordelia was saying earlier about kind of any donator of any amount to WOW getting acknowledged in exactly the same way. Cordelia, I wonder if I could come to you, and I know obviously you've spoken about this, you have experience in this, but I was wondering if I could ask what advice you might give to an organisation who's at the early stages of thinking about establishing a giving programme or a membership scheme kind of from scratch. What would you say are the key things to think about?
Yeah, and I suppose you've kind of touched on this a bit, but obviously kind of making it relevant and proportionate to the scale of the organisation. I think it's interesting at Achates, we're often kind of approached by organisations who say, oh, we want to launch a major giving programme. And I think there's a kind of, I get a sinking feeling in my stomach that they think that there's just this magic pool of major donors who are just waiting to throw their money at the organisation if only they had a kind of, you know, a link on their website, which obviously is not the case, unfortunately. But I also, on the other hand, I think organizations often aren't aware of kind of who's already in their network. I think it just, you know, those who aren't necessarily always kind of donors, but also the advocates who are within the sphere of your organization, who are almost as valuable as the donors themselves, who can kind of do the, you know, open doors and make those introductions. So I think, yeah, the most important thing to kind of start with is thinking who is already in your sphere, and if not sort of directly, but indirectly. And they're kind of like measuring, okay, this is who we're currently working with, and devising a communication strategy for them. So, you know, I do think any kind of membership scheme has to go hand in hand with marketing campaign. And I think there've been a few interesting cases recently. So the Art House is one of our clients. They recently did, I think it was over Christmas, they did a big give campaign. They'd never had any kind of major donors or giving scheme before. And so they launched a kind of big give campaign, which is very much communicating the organization's values, the impact that any donation would have. And by accepting donations at any level, they kind of were really promoting this impact philanthropy model that we've been talking about. And rather than receiving benefits for a gift, they were sort of signposting the amounts and relating it to the change that the gift could make, rather than what you get in return. So there were no closed door events for highest donors or that kind of thing. But really what they crucially did was sort of align their, setting up a membership scheme, setting up a kind of fundraising scheme in line with their ethos. And I think running some kind of big give or crowdfunder or fundraising campaign can often be a really interesting way of testing a sort of regular giving model before going out with a predetermined package without doing any kind of testing of the water. So I think, and making sure that you're kind of analysing the data and who's given through that campaign. And then something that I always say to our clients that is just the most important thing and the most basic thing is remembering to follow up and say thank you. I think often fundraisers will be working with kind of historic lists of people who once gave and there's a bit of a tentativeness about how to go back and ask again, and actually just writing, no matter how late it is in the day, and saying thank you so much for your gifts. This is what we're up to. We'd love for you to get involved. It's sort of remembering that these are people, and although it might just feel like a kind of list of members in an imaginary kind of list, actually each individual person will really appreciate being contacted and being kind of brought in as they're a supporter. Then they're not just a donor, they're very much a supporter of the work. So really treating them like that, I think, is a kind of really critical place to begin.
That's great. Thanks, Cordelia. I find it really useful to think of the idea of having a discrete kind of appeal or campaign as almost a pilot for a larger scheme, a kind of permanent scheme, whether you launch that or not. Also coming out of that, we say this a lot at Achates as well, and you've highlighted it, but the importance of data, of kind of being able to work well with whatever data you've got, whatever that looks like, and be able to kind of to use that to research, to make connections, to understand your supporter base, potential supporter base as well, and kind of absolutely build that into how you're going to develop your fundraising campaign or your individual giving campaign. Rosie, I wonder if there's anything from what Cordelia said that you've kind of recognised, or anything that you'd add about what's important to consider when establishing a membership programme, or even something that kind of hasn't worked when trying to set something up, or something that hasn't been necessary that maybe you thought was.
What Cordelia was saying about thanking donors, I absolutely agree. And I think sometimes there's a tendency, particularly with like membership schemes, when someone gives, and it doesn't really matter what amount it is, you kind of thank them there and then sometimes that's sort of it. And keep thanking them like throughout the year, or having those moments where you can engage with donors, I think is really important. And one of the best ways that I've found, and actually probably most enjoy thanking donors, is picking up the phone. Like as soon as they give, pick up a phone. I feel like sort of writing thank you letters are a little bit of a thing of the past, but then maybe that's just because Ronbet is quite sort of contemporary and we like to be a bit kind of edgy, but I think just picking up the phone. And last year we did an appeal, and I picked up the phone and said thank you to everyone that gave, no matter what the amount was. We had some people giving £5. It didn't matter. I still picked up the phone and said thank you, because you actually have moments there where you can learn about that person and find out who they are and why they've given. And these are also new people that have donated that I've never met before, and I haven't known anything about them. Because you never know, even that someone that's given £5 or £10 or £50, later along the line they could give again, or they might give a bit more. And it's just, if you've got the time to pick up the phone, I think it's just such a brilliant way to engage with people. And also because I feel like everyone's on their phones these days, everyone's on email. No one really takes the time to kind of make phone calls anymore. And so I think just, it's almost donors are a bit unexpected by it, but I think they really enjoy having that chat with you. And it gives me a real buzz as well when I speak to people. I just think it's a really nice way to engage with donors. So yes. Yeah. And now I'm trying to think of anything else that
Well, I think that's such a great point. And I mean, I can't think in the past few years of any time where any organisation that I've supported has actually picked up the phone. I mean, I've had, the thank you emails and letters, but like you say, there's something that when I think about it would just have been so much more engaging about that personal direct contact, obviously when there's the time to do it. And also I think it's really lovely to hear you say that it's a really enjoyable part of your job as well, having that kind of that task, I guess, but as a way of connecting you to supporters, but also I mean, I guess it sounds like kind of reminding you what the organisation is doing and what it's there for and the impact it brings. So that sounds like, a really lovely aspect of thinking about kind of membership schemes and how you go about kind of establishing your supporter base. On to another question now. I'd like to ask about kind of member relationship management, patron relationship management, and what kind of what in your eyes does good relationship management? You've talked a bit about it with this with the point about the phone calls, Rosie, but what are other aspects of that kind of management that is kind of, in your view, best practice, and how can you develop that cultivation and that relationship management to grow those relationships and to strengthen the engagement? What are your kind of strategies and top tips? Do you want to kick off on that again, Rosie, and then I'll go to Cordelia?
Yeah. So again, I think it can come down to the size of your organisation, or how many donors you sort of have, because I mean, I suppose in some ways I'm lucky that Rombe is very small and our donor pool is quite small, or that those that gives the appeal, I have the time to pick up the phone and have a 5-minute chat. And I appreciate that if you have a membership scheme that has sort of thousands of donors, that can be a really hard thing to do, and it's not practical for you to pick up the phone and give them a call. So I think it's finding ways, again, that kind of work best for you. In terms of deepening relationships with donors, I think what membership schemes do provide is almost a pipeline of perhaps potential major donors or people in your scheme who could potentially give more. And I think, again, as fundraisers, we're very, very busy people, and it's, you know, half the time you might be organizing events and that takes up a lot of time, or just, you know, the administration and running of membership schemes takes up a lot of your time. And I find that often I'm then not carving out enough time in my day to actually like get on and do some fundraising. But having a pool of donors, that's a really great place to start and look at who in your donor pool could potentially give more. And I think in terms of deepening relationships, that's where I would start, and that's where I'd put more of my energy into finding those people and developing relationships with them. And so, yeah, I think that's always a good place to start. And then in terms of actually developing those relationships, for me, I found the most successful way in terms of bringing someone on a journey, whether they're completely new to your organization or they're already giving at some capacity, but you could think that they could potentially give a bit more, is having more one-on-one interactions. Because I think when you have membership schemes and you're often running events, you could have, I don't know, 20 to 30 people come along to an event, and you're not going to have time to individually really develop relationships with donors in that moment. And so for me, and yes, it does take a bit more time, but if you can engage with donors one-on-one, I've just found that's far more successful in them getting to know me better, me getting to know them better. Take the time, whether it's they're coming in and sitting and watching an activity that you're doing, or you're meeting up with them for a lunch or a coffee. It can be really relaxed. It doesn't have to be sort of like a super serious kind of meeting, or even going into that meeting thinking, I've got to ask this donor for loads of money. Not at all. Just spend the time getting to know them, get to know their interests, because then you can more align that to maybe a project that you're running that you know they also might support in another organization, or it's just something that they have an interest in. So for me, and again, it comes down to kind of my resources and my time management in terms of deepening relationships with donors. Ultimately, I have kind of the end goal that I want to get more money out of them, which sounds really blunt, but that's kind of, yeah, where I sort of dedicate most of my time. So yeah, one-on-one interactions with donors, I think, is a brilliant way to deepen relationships with them.
That's great. Thanks, Rosie. And Cordelia, I wonder what kind of your experiences are in terms of the best strategies to do that. Maybe especially thinking about your time at the Serpentine, where membership levels, patron schemes are very benefits led. How did you work to kind of genuinely, authentically strengthen those relationships, maybe beyond that kind of approach?
Yeah, I think just really echoing what Rosie said. I think when you really interesting when you said about going for lunch and getting to know them, and it's not always about making the ask. I think something that I found donors really like is when you ask their feedback and their advice, so that they're feeling like they're not just there with the checkbook. You know, you actually listening to that. You know, they are a supporter of your work and actually the sort of the flattery of being asked, not just for money, but for like, we really value your opinion. You're a support of our work. What do you think's working in the organization, and what would you like to see more of? And making them really feel part of it can be a really good way of kind of bringing them in closer and deepening that engagement. And I think often, particularly with membership schemes which are quite broad and are not focused around a specific strand of the organization's work, you might not know that one of your donors has a particular interest in, I don't know, new writing, for example. So something that is really important is to kind of look at the data that you might hold about them, tickets, and what events are they coming to, as a way of getting to see, what are they interested in? This is really interesting. This person is always coming to new writing shows, or they're always coming to see exhibitions with female artists, or whatever it might be, to kind of track those patterns as a way of kind of bringing them into the work and perhaps getting them more involved in a specific area. And I think, it's a really interesting way of, as Rosie was saying, kind of the pipeline of, okay, they might be part of a membership, but actually from that membership, we might build out a kind of community of interest where a group of people who are really interested in education or talent development, or whatever it might be, and kind of using the pool of people who are already engaged, who are already invested in the work, as a way of maybe elevating their support that's a bit more specific around their personal interests. That's kind of echoing.
Thanks Cordelia. That's really useful to get your insight on that, and kind of this whole point about thinking as well about how you move from benefits-led schemes, which are valuable and have their place, but developing those into the kind of the impact philanthropy piece, which can be obviously much more meaningful to all parties, but has real longevity as well. And as you say, kind of being able to bring in different communities of interest and tailor it around kind of particular pieces of work is really, really valuable. A kind of a different sort of question now. Rosie, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how you might go about gaining the confidence of your senior management team or your boards, both, when you're looking at developing donor relationships in some of the new ways we've talked about. I think maybe especially if boards are used to thinking about membership and patron schemes in terms of those very kind of benefits-led areas of focus. Have you had kind of experience in how you kind of bring people along on that journey into impact?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's, from my experience, not an easy one either. I think, and I definitely fall into this category, that I think I always just assumed that senior management teams and boards understood what fundraising was, that they knew how we did it. I think, well, they're on our board, so they must get how it works. But actually, I forget that actually not all people on your board will have a fundraising background, and maybe not everyone actually understands how you do it, or why you do it, or how they think fundraising works. So I think to get your kind of board on board, spend a bit of time with them, educating them about what your job actually entails, what you do, how you go about fundraising, some of the fundraising strategies that you have in place, and is there anyone on your board who can help you with your fundraising, initiatives and endeavors. I think in educating them a bit more about it, I think you might find that there are one or two trustees who could actually really help you out as well, and it's a good opportunity to ask. And for me, I mean, what I found at Rhombeur, it is, just a simple thing as like arranging a coffee with some of your trustees, or finding, even if it's just one or two trustees who can help you out a little bit, or have can help bring people to your events, or can help making introductions. And again, I think I always just assumed that everyone on our board was super well networked and would be able to help with fundraising, but not everyone can, or not everyone wants to. So even if you can just find one or two members on your board who are just interested in finding out a bit more about fundraising or ways that they could help you fundraise. I found that really effective. And also your senior management team and your CEO, without you or even them realizing it, I think part of their job is to actually help you fundraise. And CEOs, I think, can be brilliant fundraisers in themselves. And something that I've set up at Rombear, I have a kind of monthly meeting with our CEO where we might just go through, I don't know, 5 of our top like prospects or people that we're cultivating, and just going through and thinking, okay, what are we going to do next with this person? Because I also appreciate that, senior members of staff and boards, they're very busy people themselves, and it's just carving out a bit of time where you can just spend one-on-one time with them, even if it's literally just creating plans for 1 or 2 people, you've already done something quite productive and, could help bring in more donors in the long term. So yeah, I think just talk about fundraising with them, educate them, and not always assume that your boards or even your senior management team understand what it is that you're actually doing, because everyone's just so busy in their different teams. Yeah, I think it's just really useful to carve out that time and just talk.
Yeah, I think it's such a good point. And also thinking about, if board members don't have a huge amount or any pre-existing knowledge about fundraising, often what they might know will be probably some of the more traditional ideas around it, like the transactional fundraising relationships. And have you found it in those kind of conversations you've had? Have you found it easy to talk about kind of donor support being driven by impact? Is that something that's kind of, it's easy to communicate? You find people are receptive to it at that level?
Sorry, I was just trying to read something in the chat at the same time. Sorry, did you say, are they kind of receptive to?
Yeah, to this idea that support is kind of driven by impact rather than kind of more transactional benefits. Have you found trustees and senior staff are on board with that idea, or are they kind of wanting you to think more about those more traditional kind of benefit-led schemes?
That's a good question. I think I'm very lucky that I work at an organization that is naturally very open to trying new things. And I'm lucky that we have like a board that's quite supportive about that as well. I think also trustees and senior management team, they are kind of, I suppose, driven by, targets, and we all have big fundraising targets that we're trying to hit. And I think, well, I don't know, but I'd imagine that a lot of boards, their kind of primary concern is, okay, well, how are we going to hit this? And I think if you can demonstrate that you might want to do things a bit differently to help you get there, then you would kind of hope that they would be open to hearing about your ideas. And also, I think if you're wanting to do something new, you don't have to like completely stop everything that you're doing and just launch into it. Like maybe start something on the side and test it. And I think naturally as fundraisers, we're quite curious people, and why not just try something out? And then you can say, okay, well, we tried it, didn't quite work as hoped, but test it out. I mean, you haven't really got anything to lose, I don't think. And if you have like a board and an exec team that's kind of willing to help, like support you do that, then that's great. But then
you can go for it. I just want to bring in one or two of the questions we've had from the chat as well. Cordelia, I wonder if I can ask you about this. I think this kind of goes back maybe a little bit to when we were talking about relationship management. What are kind of, from your perspective, sort of ideal levels of communication with members or donors or prospective supporters? Is a weekly email too much? What have you found to be a good level, or what challenges maybe have you faced in striking that balance?
Is that one to me?
Yes.
Yeah, no, it's really true. And I see in the chat the kind of bombardment of emails. Totally, there is a risk of that. And I think, I've worked in organizations where we felt it was a really good idea for the director to well, for the correspondence to look like it was coming from the director every time. And whilst that sort of felt like a benefit that you have for being a donor, and it became really clear quite quickly that it wasn't from the director, and this is an automated email and everyone's getting the same one. And I think there's something so valuable about the kind of, again, really resource heavy, but like personalized, even just like making sure that the person's name is at the top of the email and not sort of dear members or dear all, but really, and encouraging also them to reply. So quite often these are sort of newsletter, they're a bit newslettery, and actually if what you're wanting is to sort of start a conversation, then really encouraging, like, please do get in touch, here's our phone number, really happy to chat anytime about how you can get more involved, or let us know if you want to come and have a coffee, that kind of thing. Whereas I think the risk with over communication is that it starts to just look like a newsletter, and anyone who subscribes via the website can get that. And so it's the really kind of personalized approach that I think is really valuable. And then like we talked, I keep on saying, just the thank yous is like not only a kind of update, this is what we're doing, this is the impact that your gift has had, and we've done this and this many people were involved, and photos and all that sort of thing, but also then the kind of personalized to that person, thank you for your gift, on an individual basis rather than as part of a wider group. I think the phone calls as well. There's another question I think earlier, which I'm sure Rosie wants more to talk about, the kind of people who are willing to share their phone numbers. Obviously, it depends on whether someone has given you and allowed you to contact them by their phone, and depending on the relationship you have with that donor. But I think there's certainly a risk of bombardment of over communication that seems like it takes away the sort of special privilege of being a member.
Yeah. Have you found that, Rosie, that there's kind of a good level of communication and contact beyond which you're not really getting anything or doing anything more for the supporter?
I think in terms of like frequency with how often you're reaching out to your members, I think it can depends what the content is. I mean, I think if you're showing your donors the kind of impact, and you're kind of giving that positive message of this is what you've helped to achieve, I don't think there's really a kind of, I mean, even if you did that once a month, I wouldn't say that's an overkill. If anything, me thinking about this conversation, I wonder if we don't reach out to our donors enough. I don't think you could overkill it. I think, yes, if you were constantly bombarding people to give more, or to that kind of just constantly asking people for money, then yes, I think that would be really annoying. But I think if you're demonstrating the impact of their gifts, I don't think I would ever get bored or annoyed. If that was me on the other end, I'd be thinking, oh, well, like, how lovely, and they've made me feel special, and this is how I'm helping, and that's a really lovely feeling. But it certainly I wouldn't find it annoying. So I think it depends what you're kind of communicating about, and what your content is.
We're moving towards the end of our session now, so one question I do want to get in is to ask you both, and I think we've kind of touched on the ways in which membership giving is already evolving, and the way in which you've both kind of seen it evolve or been involved in its development in your organizations. But how do you see it kind of going further in the longer term? How do you think membership giving is going to change, if it will change, and how can people working in fundraising or managing individual giving programs prepare themselves for change that might be coming? Cordelia, do you want to have a go at that one?
Yeah. Just the easy, quick answer. Well, no, I think it's sort of, going back to what we've said, but also the kind of sharing the responsibility of fundraising. I think increasingly so, like senior management boards and also entire teams are going to have to accept that fundraising is not just the role of the fundraiser, and that it's embedded into kind of everything. And, you know, I've seen quite a few organizations now, they're kind of marketing and development teams working together, because they just have to be so well aligned, particularly if we're going to see a move towards more impact philanthropy, where fundraising is absolutely aligned with the organization's ethos. And so it's, you know, whilst we're promoting the values of the organization, we're simultaneously asking you to join and support. So it you know, I think going back to kind of getting senior management and board on side, I think in a way it's almost easier, because I think kind of gone are the days of people having really awkward, you know, people who don't feel comfortable asking for money and, you know, making those approaches, which it is a real art. But I also think if it becomes easier when you're backing it up with a real impact. And for me, at least, I think it's a lot easier to approach someone and say, look, this is something really fantastic. You know, this is the real evidence of the change that our organization's making. Do you want to support us? Rather than, you know, here you can come to this, you know, wonderful party, or, you know, I think it's much easier to approach someone in that way. And hopefully it'll be easier to get whole organizations on board in that sense as well. So yeah, a positive move, I hope.
Yeah, I think that also it speaks to another comment we've had in the chat about someone asking about if you're the only fundraiser in your organization, or if fundraising is kind of spread across different departments, how do you kind of focus in on individual supporters and membership schemes? And I think what you've just said, it is kind of part of that, of kind of the culture of fundraising in the organization and thinking about impact, which is everybody's responsibility. Rosie, do you have thoughts on kind of the future of membership in this way, and about how, what skills or what readiness people might be best off having or cultivating to kind of to put themselves in the best possible position to really benefit from membership?
Yeah, it's a really tricky question. I completely agree with sort of Cordelia's answer. And yeah, I think when I think of like the word charity, it's that kind of that notion of people giving and not expecting anything in return. And I think, I feel like there is a little shift that's kind of happening, where organizations are kind of moving towards that. But equally, I think there's always going to be a place for membership schemes. And again, it kind of really depends on what your organization is and what they do. And, you know, I can't ever imagining somewhere like the Tate dropping their membership schemes like that. I can't ever imagine that happening. But I think you can have the two things running alongside one another if you want to. I mean, yeah, I feel like it sort of comes down a lot to the size of your team and like the resources that you have. But yeah, running it in line with what your values and what you want to achieve ultimately as a charity. I don't think there's a right or wrong way to do it. But in terms of the future, I don't know is the honest answer.
Yeah. But I think that point about kind of it's not as if you know, all membership schemes are destined to transform and change. There are, like you say, some organizations where they remain kind of massively important and a huge asset, and an organization can quite rightly kind of leverage the assets and the opportunities it has in that way. But equally, I think from our discussion, it's really clear that impact philanthropy case is becoming more and more important, and really leaning on who your organization is, what your values are, to safeguard the future of your support, I think. That's been a really brilliant discussion. Thank you both. Cordelia, as if you hadn't talked enough today, I'm going to throw back to you just to wind up our session today.
No, thank you. That's fine. Well, no, just thank you so much, Rosie Hebb, for joining us. It's been a really interesting conversation. Thank you. And thank you also, Phoebe, of course, for chairing today's session. Today's session was presented by Achates. If you are interested in finding out a bit more about the work that Achates does, we offer a range of services, including recruitment, fundraising, strategy, and organisational development. So if you'd like to discuss how we might be able to help your organisation, please do get in touch. You can email us at info@achates.org.uk. And of course, you're very welcome to join our next Achates Live, which will be broadcast on the 8th of June. We'll share more details soon, but we really hope you can join us then. Thank you again so much for joining today, and we will